Welcome to the Color Timer podcast. I am your host, Vincent Taylor. This is the podcast where we speak with professionals who work with color. If you have not checked out my podcast before, it is a 15-minute podcast. I'm trademarking it as a micro podcast. It quite literally runs off a 15-minute sand timer. Gimmicky, yeah, a little. It's really to focus the conversation, keep it concise, and get to the heart of the matter straight away. Today, I am speaking with the lovely Mr. Matt McFarland. Matt is a colorist extraordinaire. He came onto my radar because he's done a couple of posts recently about remastering some classic films, some beautiful films. So we're going to drill down. We're going to talk about remastering, what's involved. So let's go.
Take your seats because the hourglass is about to turn. We are entering the world of the micro podcast. Explore the craft, creativity, and science of professionals who use color to tell stories. Welcome to the Color Timer with Vincent Taylor.
Matt, welcome to the Color Timer.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's awesome. So I saw a post that you did a few weeks back talking about mastering. I can't remember the film that you're working on, but I'm fascinated. But before we even get to that, I've got to remember to start my timer. Are you ready for the game show to begin?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's go. Let's back up. First of all, tell me about yourself, what your background is and how you got to where you are now.
Oh, wow. It's a pretty eclectic background. I moved out to LA to be a cinematographer and a writer, and then I found a bunch of other people were doing that as well. So I got a job in post at a visual effects house, POP film, which became Riot Pictures, and so I got lucky with that job, and they had me timing visual effects pretty quickly because I had shot film. So that was my background, was taking match clips from the lab and put them on a light box and matching our visual effects shots with printer lights and then getting the film back. And of course, in that process, your LUTs had to be 100% accurate and that whole process had to be really tight. Yeah, and then as DI started coming online, a lot of my clients were calling me. I was running a scanning and recording department, and they wanted me to do independent DIs because DIs were $300,000. And they said, if you could do one for $125,000, that'd be great. So I opened up a small company out of Raleigh Studios and did that for about 4 years. And we had another strike at the time, and so that took care of that. But yeah, then I got a job at Warner Brothers as a colorist. So, and been doing that ever since.
Yeah, right. And then you're based where, sorry?
Right now I'm at ColorTime, which is the North Hollywood Burbank border.
Right.
Yeah,
So you're in LA, and and then you've come into this world of mastering. Can you explain to me what? First of all, excuse my naivety on it, but what's involved with that? Where do you start with something like that? Even with somebody bringing you a project like that?
Well, first obviously you go back to the neg. Right now, the big push is scanning 4K or 6K, even 8K off the original negative, where for a lot of years it was done off the IPs. But now with monitor resolutions being what they are, we're going back to the original negative, which makes it a little tougher in some regards because there's no timing built in. IPs always had a timing built in. So that comes to us, and we usually, depending on the project and the time allowed, we do a lot of research as far as looking at the old masters to see what was done and to see if that was approved. And then also too, the best part when you get to do this is going back to the original prints. The studios will usually have a print that is marked as best possible or client approved. And so you go back and watch that print because that's going to be typically wildly different than the previous master you had. And you'll see the limitations that you had on film at the time versus what was done on the reference. Because I had a friend once called me a forensic colorist because you have to kind of go back and you have to go back and look at that and say, why does this look like that? Was it because that's what a director asked for, or is it because of a limitation of time or equipment or even a colorist, sometimes somebody might have done a one light, and you're stuck looking at a reference, wondering if that was really what the intention was. Yeah, and then from there you go and you start setting looks, and if you're doing HDR, which I've done a lot of, you try to. The biggest thing with the remastering is not trying to create a new vision of the film. You try to go in and go for the intent of the film, and not create a new vision, unless of course a director tells you to. But you try to, if you're doing, God, what did I do? Terms of endearment. I mean, we did that in HDR. I mean, you're not going to go really crazy on that. You want to keep the essence of the look of the film alive. And if you had a blown out window, now you can see some detail out of it. If you had some crushed blacks, you can now see a little more detail in there. But you don't want to change that. That's not typically something you would think of as a HDR showpiece, but it allows us to put that content out there on HDR Blu-rays, Dolby Vision, typically. And
when you're doing that initial research, like when you got that amazing privilege to watch those prints, this might seem like a silly question, but do you take notes of that? How do you or do you just get a sense of the film when you watch it?
Yeah, no, I take notes, and sometimes every once in a while I take a little snap of the screenshot of the projection just to remind myself what I was seeing. Not that it's accurate, but just to remind myself, oh yeah, those highlights were really cyan, or yeah, that was a really warm scene. But yeah, that's usually the notes are, hey, interiors are really warm, exteriors were, skies are really cyan versus very blue. Which way were the blues leaning in the skies and things like that. Just general notes.
And do you kind of touched on this already, but how much do you then go, hey, I think this was a mistake? Like maybe you're looking at a print that is, the quality has changed over the years. Mm-hmm. How do you ascertain whether or not that is an accurate representation? Yeah,
a lot, and that's where experience comes in. I've been fortunate in that, I started out in film, shooting film, but also scanning film and recording out film, and really being familiar with that print process and knowing that, what layer of film, how's that print fade over time? Was the print too dark or too bright? And it's really just experience, knowing that print shadows might be a little lifted, and also too knowing which projector you're watching on.
Of course.
There's so many different aspects to think about. Is the projector at 9-foot lamperts or 14-foot lamperts? Is there a hot spot? And you have to just know that and go from there. And then also too, but I mean, we use HD references, old HD references more often than the film print, and that too is another thing you have to think about, because an old HD reference is going to be at 100 nits. Whereas the print would be at 48 nits, and now you're doing 1,000 nits, and how's that all translate? And it depends. I've had filmmakers want me to make it as true to the original master as possible, and not get detail out the windows. And others want to see that. So
yeah. So even though you've got the ability to see that information, maybe they don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want to say specific films, but one that I was doing that was a very famous older film from the 70s. As they're panning across a room, there's a bunch of 2Ks out the windows with high rollers and sandbags. And obviously that was never seen before, and actually I used to shoot film, so knowing that as a filmmaker, if I sat there with my light meter and said, oh, don't worry, that window's blown out, we're never going to see that. Well, now we do, so I have to know, well, they probably didn't want to see that grip standing out there smoking a cigarette, so we have to bring that down. And so then you have to create artificial clips and soft clip roll-offs and things like that. But sometimes it's really pretty out the window. Hey, cool. Hopefully they want to see that. So it's usually using your best judgment, unless you have the director there, which I've had the good fortune of having quite a few really good directors and DPs.
What's the sense there, when the director gets to see like an HDR version of an older film? They must be pretty excited.
They are very excited. And sometimes you have a director come in, if they're still a very active director, sometimes they're really hesitant that you're kind of changing the look of their film, and they have to put them at ease and let them know that, no, we're here to respect your film. But some of the older directors are really excited, and I've had a director get kind of emotional because the film he had over the years, the HD version was a cult film, not a cult film. It had a cult following, but it was a studio release back in the day, and it always had a bad master, and he was always afraid to see it in the screen because people would go and have screenings of it, and he just despised it. And what we did, we even redid some visual effects and created some things that he had always wanted. And yeah, he was really moved, and it was really nice to do.
That's satisfying.
Yeah, it's very satisfying. It was great. And he brought his family in to look at it and all that. And he's even reached out after just seeing recent screenings around the world of people wanting to see it, just how happy he is. So that's always great.
Man, that's fantastic. That must be brilliant. This is a weird question, but do you know what is the motivation for a studio to go, yeah, you know what, that film, we want to remaster that film? What provokes that choice?
It depends on what the film is. Because there's, at any studio, you're going to have an archive department and a mastering department. The mastering department's usually driven by money. Like what's going to sell, let's make some Blu-rays here of this title. Maybe there's an anniversary of the film release coming up, that kind of thing. But the archive department usually is to get that decaying film onto a nice archive master, a digital restoration of it. And so they'll usually do a nice 4K or 6K, 8K scan to put that into the archive. And so a lot of times you're just scanning it and putting a grade on it to have it archived for posterity, so that if that film degrades any longer, they have it. And to keep also a library available. But yeah, a lot of times it's obviously financial or anniversaries. I will say one title I did Wayne's World a year or so ago.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, that was great. And the director came in, and that was phenomenal. And that was because of an anniversary coming up, and they did a big re-release of it at various screenings, and that was cool. And so that was, because the negative on that is still in really good shape, and they have film dupes of it. But a lot of these old films don't, they'll piece together some ONEG here and some IP here, a fine grain here, and they'll piece together the best pieces they can find. We did, when I was at Paramount, one of the first titles I did there was oddly a black and white title, Elvis King Creole, which is actually a really good film. And I remember they have their archive department is really strong, and they do a lot of diligent research, and they don't really give up on elements until they find what they want. And the movie came out looking really nice. There's a lot of work done for some of the opticals, because some of these old film opticals were dupes of dupes of dupes, and they get really grainy. We did a lot of work on those, but the main title was really rough. It was a lot of B-roll that had been duped multiple times for dissolves and for titles, and it was just, the whole movie looked great except for that main title. And the guy researching it at the time wouldn't give up. We're trying to find he found all these B-roll elements that were hidden, under different names, instead of being called, main titles, it was called, pickups or stock footage or whatever. And it was some really great, and it just saved the movie, because if you start out the first few minutes looking really rough, it kind of ruins it for you. And it ended up being fantastic. And I had a visual effects guy key out, because it had very explicit or very specific title design. And so we had a guy comp those out, and we took those out and kind of rebuilt the whole main title. And so that stuff like that's fine. It's really rewarding, to see that when it's done. So stuff like that's cool.
With the archiving of the films, like you've got your scans, you've got your grades. What going out to the public, that can be on a Blu-ray, or I imagine they'd even have a remaster that would be for streaming or something like that as well. But what is the archive held on to keep it? Is it a digital format, or is it something like a hard copy? Again, it depends. I know it's usually stored in the cloud as a digital copy.
They have a huge cloud archive of everything. Some studios, when I was at Warner Brothers, I don't know if they still do it because it's been a while, but they would record out YCMs of certain films,
Right.
very, very important films. Because that's the best way to archive it, is a YCM film, that black and white stock isn't going to shrink or have any problems. And we know now, even with color film, that if it's stored properly, which it is now, could last 100 years without any issues. And so some places still record out a digital copy. Some don't, but they have it on the cloud. Makes me nervous, but there it is. So, and that's and now they're doing a good job putting metadata in that information too. So if they need to look something up, they can find it. Because right now you go back to old versions of films, and they spend months digging through files, that knowing that stuff isn't labeled correctly, to try to find elements. I did right when the pandemic started, I was working on a big film that had a director's cut, and it took them forever to find the cut list, the old Avid cut list and pull list for the film. And for a while they were trying to eyeball it, and it was impossible. And so it took probably a couple months for them to find that. So that, and that became critical. But yeah, in the future, that'll all be tagged with metadata, and people can find it a lot more easily.
I've kind of just very, very recently rediscovered Blu-rays, and got a Blu-ray player for the first time in I guess 10 years. And the world of 4K HDR, I mean, they look fantastic. I'm so glad I did it. But what's going to happen when, this technology changes again? Is this archival stuff, you're going to have to do them all again, or do you think it's...
Yeah, unfortunately, as a colorist, sometimes, there's issues with like how things are handled at the top versus. I've been a big advocate. I'll put it this way. I've been a big advocate for ACES. I've been using ACES since probably 2015 or 16. I think before I needed to use it, I knew I was going to want to use it, so I would use it as my color science, even on a single output remastering job, just so I could get comfortable with how the curves and everything works, because it is a little unusual. Yeah. But that being said, I've tried to push studios to use that, because in 10 years' time, when you come back to pulling these elements off the archive, if it says ACES CCT, you can then jump in and just apply transforms. Even if ACES has become obsolete, people will know of it and be able to apply certain things. And I know from I did DIs too in the past, and people will make, will output a log graded, and then they'll have their own specific LUT on it. And if you don't have that specific LUT, the log graded doesn't mean anything to you. You can guess, put something close on to it. And even in my job, I'll get some of the remastering will be something from the DI era, and you get a log graded, and that they had what's that log graded from? Was it from their HD trim or from their theatrical? Because those two things are different. And it's most likely from the theatrical. So you apply a theatrical LUT that makes sense, but it's not really the one they had based on their lab. And it wouldn't be, because you always had to recalibrate recorders for the changing lab chemistry. And so even if you had the right LUT, it wouldn't be exactly right. But a lot of places, if they had good color scientists, would have had a LUT for Rec 709, and they would have done trims on top of that. So that's why I like ACES. If you can have that ACES information, and you could then apply that, even using Dolby Vision. I love Dolby Vision, what they've done for remastering, because I do the 1000 nit, and then I do the Dolby analysis, and it's really close. And you just do a modest trim, and sometimes you have to make bigger adjustments than other times, depending if there's flashes and things like that. But it really makes it easy. If you have all that, if you do things in ACES and you have that all logged, and then you have your Dolby Vision metadata, 15 years from now, if you pull those scans up and throw them into a color corrector, and you have that information, you should be able to reproduce it pretty easily. Unfortunately, it's kind of all over the place, because a lot of places it's up to the colorist. I like using aces, and another colorist, I hate using aces, or
Right.
And so, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I hope people would start using something kind of uniform like that.
I wave the flag so loudly about my podcast, going, it's a 15-minute podcast, but I always go over because I'm trying to behave myself. But I want to throw one more question at you, which is more of a personal opinion. But your top 3 films?
Oh my God, my top 3 films.
I know, nasty, right? Nasty question.
No. I have my favorite film of all time. Cinema Paradiso. I love that film. And then L.A. Story.
Ah.
I love L.A. Story. I love Steve Martin and L.A. Story. I was very excited that he has this documentary out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Because I had been a writer, and so when I realized he was a great writer and not just a funny comedian, I was like, wow. So Cinema Paradiso, L.A. Story, and probably any Cameron Crowe film, like Almost Famous, or maybe, probably Almost Famous. So those, I would say those 3. I'm a big Cameron Crowe fan.
Yeah.
As well. So that would be it, probably.
I didn't do that if you're stuck on a desert island and you only had one film question, because that's so mean. But Matt, thanks a zillion. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. And there's a whole heap more questions I wanted to ask you, but time restrictions. But thanks, mate. I appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome. Anytime.
Matt, thank you so much. That was fantastic. It was really, really cool. I asked Matt at the end about his top 3 films, and then after we stopped recording, he goes, oh, there was one more. And so we chatted about a film called Strange Brew, which, just check it out. He told me the premise, and then I've just looked it up because I hadn't seen it before. I'm gonna watch it. It's really, really cool. But Matt, thank you so much. You're awesome. Thank you to my executive producer, MixingLight.com. If you are watching this or listening to this on their website, you already know what they do. But if you don't, check them out, MixingLight.com. They can help you with all things color. Thank you to you, my wonderful listeners, and for all your feedback. Please keep it coming. Do the like, subscribe thing. I know I keep saying it, but it does help. That kind of support, it helps a lot. And yes, there are t-shirts available. Okay, I've had people asking me about it, surprisingly. But if you want one, you can get them. Check out the show notes. There'll be a link to the t-shirts there. Take care. I'll see you on the next one.
The Color Timer, a micro podcast experience.